which might back in 1919 or prior to the century before, involved the shipment of opium into China in return for trade goods, and the bribery of various politicians in the United Kingdom to make sure that they didn't interfere with what was known as the opium trade and would support the Opium Wars, which was essentially financed by the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank Corporation. And that will obviously lead to the present. But anyway, so these banks or bankers, they get inside a room and they have what I think the Chicago mob would call a pay-to-play session, where the different bankers, once the project has been described or defined, and it might be the theft of a cargo of opium or weapons going from A to B to be sold in market C, all of those kinds of projects require money. So let's call them the 16 panel bankers who are locked in a room together to try and work out who wants to do what with respect to a criminal project. They have a bidding operation, and they're basically bidding on what price they are prepared to accept in terms of interest rates to borrow money to finance the criminal project. And each banker has its own network and its own powerful families connected to it, its own access to funds, including union pension funds and insurance companies that are always cash rich. Union pension funds because they force members to pay dues, and insurance companies because they force the would-be insured to pay insurance premiums to cover off some future risk. So these banks, they decide, all right, well, let's hypothetically take a project, and we're jumping around in history now, and decide, let's finance the demolition of the Twin Towers. And they work out a price, let's say $3.2 billion, which they have to borrow. So they select one bank, which might be either one of the 16 LIBOR panel banks or one of its affiliates. In the particular case of 911, they selected Wells Fargo. And Wells Fargo was affiliated with Citibank, which is a LIBOR panel bank, through an encryption system or a network-centric warfare system called the Federal Bridge Certification Authority. So the action to be taken would require some prepping work. That is to say, if they were going to drop the Twin Towers in the same day, they would have to have a story, you could call it a wag the dog story, to be inserted into the media as soon after the towers were hit. Because the argument from a propaganda point of view, you've got to be first with your conspiracy theory if it's going to be not dismissed as a conspiracy theory. So those people who've watched some of the footage of the news on 9/11 might be familiar with the Fox News broadcast, where a newscaster was interviewing General Alexander Haig about 12 minutes after the north face of the North Tower had been hit. And he asked General Alexander Haig who he thought had done it. Well, that's pretty hypothetical, isn't it, for some clown in a room somewhere to even hypothesize about what might have hit the North Tower when there is absolutely zero evidence other than an apparent gash in the side of the tower and a lot of smoke and noise and fun. So General Alexander Haig says, well, I don't want to speculate, and then proceeds to. And he said, it's either the Palestinians or the Bin Laden group. Whoa! The Bin Laden group was identified as a prospective perpetrator about 12 minutes after the north face of the North Tower had been hit by General Alexander Haig. Now, why would General Alexander Haig have come up with that theory? Well, that's what this show and its successors will identify at that crime scene. But suffice it to say that the script had been written well before the attack, and there were a significant number of people in the vicinity of the crime scene that had very specific roles to play to spin this amazing wag the dog story. And one of the principal generators of wag the dog story, and it's been in the business since 1851, is the Reuters news agency. Now, Reuters theoretically is supposed to be an independent news agency which sends its journalists around the world to be first with the news, and historically they would telegraph the news in, and now of course they use the internet. Actually, it appears they use the Federal Bridge Certification Authority to hand off a story, either complete or in parts, to be reassembled and chopped and changed around in other places, and then pumped out as propaganda into the unsuspecting television sets of the mass audience. So it shouldn't become as a surprise to recognize that there would be a great interest, if you are in the business of generating wag the dog stories, to have the British Bankers Association take over that operation, so it could inject a wag the dog story and send the stock market in a lucrative direction, i.e. upwards if you're long in the market and downwards if you're short in the market. And the same, of course, applies to the leverage lease on the Twin Towers. If you have an insurance policy on the leverage leases that's predicated on the tenants not paying the rent because they're all killed, then it would be very interesting to double the insurance, let's say, on the Twin Towers. So when the tenants are killed, you can claim the insurance and get your money back. So there's no doubt in my mind that the British Bankers Association had decided to drop both towers on 9/11 and had spent a significant period of time, I would say at least 5 to 7 years, developing the script of what they thought they could get away with in terms of the wag the dog story. And the logical place to go and develop that script is Reuters, because Reuters sells its news into the various chains, including Fox News and Sky News and so on, and the BBC.